Okay, so
She's a green white jacket.
yeah. Before we start, my child is in the same room as me. I live in a very small apartment, so hopefully that doesn't get to be too distracting. I may have to pause a few times in between here, and you may hear a lot of that in the background. So before we actually start rigging up anything, also I'll apologize because I'm using my laptop and I don't exactly have the greatest microphone. So before we actually start doing anything on the unit template rig, I'm going to just walk you through kind of the basic idea of what we're going to do here. So I'm going to first just create a little 3D chain here so that you can get an idea of how we are going to be animating. So this is a basic kinematic chain. You have an effector here, and I'm actually going to change this display to rings, just so that you can kind of get an idea of where the effector is. Where this is a root, I'm going to change this really quickly to just a pyramid. Again, just something that you can visualize where both these are. So with a inverse kinematic rig, when I grab the effector and I move it, it's going to move the bone chain. It's all pretty basic. But we don't actually want to be moving effectors with the Battlefront rig. It's poor practice to just move these as a whole. So we're going to use control objects to control this. And so the basic idea here is we're just going to, I'm going to grab a quick implicit cube. So an implicit cube is just going to basically be a cube that we can see inside of our window that does not show up on the renderer. And I'm going to match its transforms to the effector. Now, grabbing the effector again, I am going to constrain the effector, and I'm going to constrain its pose. Yeah, she is. Sorry, my daughter's talking about unicorn. So we are going to grab.
What do you say? What do you say, unicorn? What do you say?
Yeah. So we're going to grab the effector, and we're going to constrain it to the cube. Now we're going to re-grab the cube here, and we are going to move the cube, and you can see that our chain moves with the cube in whatever direction we are moving, as if we were moving the effector. This prevents us from having to key the effector, which is good, because in Battlefront we can only have 32 key nodes. Now in addition to that, I'm going to go ahead and create an implicit sphere this time. On most of the chains for the limbs, so the arms and the legs, we're going to need something called a up vector. So I'm going to go transform and set the neutral pose, or transform and match all transforms to the starting bone here. And then I'm going to translate this locally along its y-axis. And now if I select the first bone again and I constrain it, I can choose the chain's up vector to be matching where this is. And now, as you can see, as I move the sphere, it's going to help rotate that bone. Furthermore, we could actually constrain this to follow the direction of this. I don't think it's really necessary. It's an easy enough to grab handle. So with that, I'm going to create a new scene. And I am going to go and import the ground dummy.emdl. And again, what we want to do when we create a rig is we want to be able to move all these bones without having to key any of them right away. We're going to have to, because Battlefront uses forward kinematics, we're going to need to key all these bones eventually. But we are going to want to set up our rig in a way that we don't add anything new to the skeleton either. So first, for organization, I'm going to create some layers. Layer default, I'm actually going to rename scene rigging, and that's just going to hold basically all of our default scene things, so the camera, the lights, I'm going to name a second layer mesh, and that will hold our mesh for the player. A third layer shadow volume, that will hold, of course, our shadow volume. A bones layer for bones. We are going to want a effector layer for our effectors. A root layer for our roots. And a controller layer for all of our animatable controllers. Now, I'm going to automatically swap my default layer to controller since that's what we're going to be using most. Now, if you hit 8 to bring up your Explorer and press L, you can now drag and drop all of this in. So all this, camera root, camera light, ground dummy, camera interest, ground dummy.dummy, ground dummy.dummy root, those will all stay in. All of your roots here, however, we will drag into the root layer. And I'm going to go ahead and hide the root layer for now. I will need to unhide it later because there is one root that we need to build our spine, but we will cross that bridge when we get there. All of your bones, first off, your hands for whatever reason are hidden, so unhide your hand bones. So you're going to want to select all of your bones and just drag those into the bone layer. For our purposes here, we are actually going to consider our bone pelvis, bone root, and HP weapons to all be bones as well. This is for keying purposes. As for effectors, anything with an F, where you see ground-dummy.f, we are going to want to grab all of those and drag them into our effector layer. While we're here and we have them all selected, actually, I'm going to turn all of our effectors, press enter, go to display rings, and change my size to about 0.05. As you can see inside the window here, it just makes finding your effectors a lot easier. Override texture should go into the mesh layer. Shadow volume should go into the shadow volume layer. And now, shadow volume we're going to make not selectable, we're going to make it not visible either. The mesh we don't really need to edit if we're using this to animate, so we're going to go and make the mesh unselectable but still visible so that we can choose the bones underneath it. Again, roots for now is invisible. Might as well make it not selectable too. We will be bringing that back later. And then scene rigging we don't need visible or selectable. There's nothing in there that we really at this point will need. So now in terms of effectors, just to give you a little bit of an idea here. So we are going to be using a inverse and a forward kinematic rig. So our head and our neck is actually going to be, because it's just two bones, we're going to be using forward kinematics to move these. And it's going to get a little bit weird with that. We're going to get a warning when we do that because we're going to want to constrain our rotation to the head bone and the neck bone, but we're going to want to constrain our position from our controller, and it's going to create a loop, which I'm guessing you're not supposed to do, but we're going to anyway. And then so the hands will be inverse kinematic, but the toes, now the feet will be inverse, or the legs here will be inverse kinematic. The feet will be forward kinematic because it's just easier to control over that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a few implicit geometries. For effectors, I'm only going to use implicit cubes, just so that there's no confusion as to where we're going with this. So now I know I'm going to need 2 effectors for the legs, so I'm going to go ahead and create those cubes now. And then I will name and replace them as I go so that I get a little bit of an idea. So this one, I'm going to go 0.125 for its size so that it's easy enough for me to see. So 1 cube will be for the bottom of the left leg's F. This cube will be bottom of the right leg's F, this one right here. We are going to need a cube for the pelvis. Even though that is a bone, not an effector, we're still going to use an effector-like handle. Actually, I changed my mind. We're not going to do that. We're going to do a disc for that. So, actually, no, we'll just use this. It's already here. So we need one more for the clavicle. We need another one for this clavicle, one for this arm, one for this hand, one for this arm, and another one for this hand. And then the spine, don't even worry about right now. We will get to that in just a little bit. So effectors, now again, all I'm going to do is, as I go along, this one I know is for the left foot. Taking into account that we're viewing the unit forward, so left will be right, right will be left from what we're viewing. So I'm going to name this controller left foot. And then again, I'm going to first match all of my transforms to this effector. Now, the feet are going to be a little bit different than most bones because we are going to actually match our rotation to the foot bone, so that when we move this foot bone, it's kind of in the same orientation as this box. And now I'm going to select this effector, and I'm going to constrain it, pose to the controller. Now I'm going to click on this bone, constrain, orientation, and this will just constrain strictly our rotation to the controller. So now when I go move the controller, you will see, actually you won't see anything at this point because we do not have inverse kinematics turned on. So to do that, we're going to turn FKIK, well, you're going to need to first go animation, skeleton, inspect chain properties, or you can hit Control R like I did. If you're in Soft Image 2015, I'm not sure if Control R is still the hotkey. So this is going to assume that you're using the mod tool 7.5. You just turn IK blend up and force IK, and then that should automatically turn on your inverse kinematics, as you can see. Now if I rotate this, you'll see that it rotates the foot down there. And now that that is all set, and it's back in a neutral position, the last thing I'm going to do with the controller is set its neutral pose. And this is so that if I move it anywhere, and I don't want it to be there, I can just hit 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and it would, the rotation kind of messed up there, but you should be able to zero out your positions and get it back to a neutral pose, which is the position we were at. And we want to do that with all of our bones. So again, I'm going to do the same thing with this foot. Match all transforms. I'm going to match my rotation to this foot. I'm going to change the name to controller right foot. I'm going to set its neutral pose. Constrain this pose to this effector. And constrain this orientation to the controller. And then, same thing, I should be able to, at this point, translate it, but I can't because, again, inverse kinematics is not turned on. That's it. Now hips, same thing. A lot of this is just going to be repetition. I'm going to name this controller pelvis. I am going to match its transforms to the pelvis. And I am now actually going to expand its x-axis a little bit out so that I can see it. And then same thing with its z-axis. I'm going to expand a little bit out. Actually, it may be better to do this instead in
1, 2,
either PPG or
4.
otherwise, because I'm pretty sure if I constrain my orientation and scaling, it is going to cause me to inherit the scale as well, but I'm going to try it. Pose. Yeah. So, don't do that. Constrain, position. At this point, I've gone too far, so I'm just going to do this anyway. Constrain your orientation. And now when you move the controller, we will fix that spine issue where it's separating later. We just want to make sure that our knees are bending here. And I'm going to set my neutral pose. And now, so basically when we come back to do the spine, what we're going to do is we're going to set 2 different controllers up. One of them will be put to the bone root of this, the bottom of the spine here, and then we will be able to just constrain the position of the bone root itself to the top of the spine. Alternatively, you could also just while we are ahead, constrain your pose. I don't think it's going to make a big difference if you constrain just your pose to that. Well, maybe it will. Constrain your position rather to that, and then you should be able to move all that with a single controller. Alright, so clavicles, I'm going to go ahead and check to make sure that FK is turned on. Force inverse kinematics, same thing. Controller, our right clavicle. I'm going to match all my transforms to that controller. I'm going to take this and I am going to constrain its position to this cube. And now I should be able to go back here, move this. I always like to just double check them, make sure that it's actually working. Same thing on this side. Controller, left clavicle. It's all going to be very, very repetitive at first. So this will be controller, left arm. And I did not set the neutral pose of any of my new controllers, so I will do that really quickly. Okay. And now I believe I'm going to actually set my neutral pose on these. I believe that, again, inverse kinematics is turned off on all this, in which it appears to be. So, oh, the hands actually have it on. Forced IK. And same thing, joint, force IK. Force IK, the reason why we're turning this on is because we want to be able to set our up vectors, and for whatever reason the skeleton does not like to play nicely if force IK is not on. So just double check really quick to make sure that your hand actually works. It looks about right. And now the last set of controllers that we really have to focus on is going to be the back here. So first I'm going to go to 6, and I'm going to change my roots to be visible and selectable again. And this is because I'm actually going to need a small root hidden right here. If you're looking for it in Explorer view, it's root A spine. I'm going to hit enter, and I'm actually going to change root A spine to a set of rings. I'm going to try 0.075. I just want them to be a little bit larger so that I know where they are. We are going to now create 2 new control objects. Again, they will be cubes. Sorry, implicit geometries. I'm going to need these to be quite visible, so I'm going to actually change them to 0.25, and I'm going to set both of them like that. So this one will be controller A spine, and this one is going to be controller rib cage. Now what we are going to do is we're going to take controller rib cage, we're going to match all of its transforms to the effector right here, which is effector rib cage, and we are going to take the controller A spine, and we are going to set all of its transforms to be the root. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is, while I'm ahead, so we're actually going to use forward kinematics on the spine bones itself, but we're going to use the inverse kinematic spine curve that Softimage provides for us. So I'm going to go animate skeleton, and I'm going to create a spine. If you look down at the bottom of the screen, it'll tell you to pick a hip object. So we're going to pick this, and then after clicking that, it tells us to pick a chest object, which will be this. Our number of vertebrae should actually be 2, because it's going to create a final vertebrate at the top either way. So we only want 2 sections. Now that that is created, this is going to be our spine curve. We are going to select our bones, and we are going to constrain our orientation to this controller with A spine. We are going to constrain our orientation to this bone with the mid spine. And we are going to constrain our orientation to, I believe this big box is our final one. Now, oh, sorry, I'm going to actually have to remove my constraints because I clicked the wrong item. So, constrain our orientation to this. And now this may look like it's giving wonky results at this point, and that's not something that you should really worry about right quite this second. Let's see that our spine is actually moving with us.
There we go. Okay, there we go.
Thank you. And now we use forced IK, and we turn that chain back on. that should correct any of the geometry issues that we were having before. You can see we are able to move it. Our spine is moving with our controllers, which is what we want. And now controller rib cage, I'm going to set neutral pose, and same thing with controller A spine. Now with the remainder of this, from the spine that's created, I'm going to go ahead and hide the vertebrae. Who just came into the voice chat? And now we can view that without any of the other extra stuff. And again, our spine should be able to move freely. We actually have two nulls here that I forgot to hide for our depths. Okay, now we are going to need to set our up vectors for the arms, the legs, before we move on to anything else. So up vectors I like to personally have as spheres, just to kind of give the impression that it's going to be something that's going to rotate. So I'm going to name this up vector, and now I know that I'm going to need 4 of them, so I'm going to go ahead and just place these roughly where I need them. I need 1 for each leg, 1 for each arm, and I will need some for the hands as well, but we will get into that after we do the arms, so that we make sure that we have full control of our chains, just in case something goes a little wonky there. So this one I'm going to name up vector left leg. And to create an up vector, again, transform, match all transforms. I'm going to match it to this bone. I'm now going to move it locally along its y-axis, back far enough that I think I can grab it. And selecting the first bone of this chain, I'm going to go mat, constrain, chain up vector, and now I will just quickly drag it to test it and then move it back. You can see it's rotating, and now I'm just going to set it to neutral pose, and then same thing with the other leg. Just it's going to be named up vector right leg. I'm going to match all transforms to this leg, move it backwards to be about the same distance. Doesn't have to be perfect. To be about the same distance. And now all that I have to do is set its neutral pose, take this, mat, constrain, chain up vector, and select it. And then just double check to make sure that it moves properly. And it looks like it does. So I'm actually going to go and make those a little bit smaller so that I don't risk grabbing them when I don't need the other one. And then same thing with the arms here. And just take those down to 0.05 for spheres. And then up vector left arm, transform, match all transforms, move it along its local y-axis backwards, select the first bone, mat, constrain, chain up vector, and select that. And now I should be able to move that quite... Oh, sorry. Y-axis, it won't move anything. I should be able to rotate it like this. Perfect. Same thing, other arm. Translate that backwards along its y-axis, local y-axis. Now, I'm going to actually set both these neutral poses because I forgot to do that. And select the arm, constrain, chain up vector, and choose that.
Ooh,
And now,
what's that? What's that,
now
Daddy?
we can move that.
What's that, Daddy?
What is it?
What's that, Daddy?
What do you think it
What's
is?
that, Daddy?
Is Stormtrooper? The clone trooper? Somebody's going to shoot me for saying that. It's probably going to be Dat Boy, seeing as he's the only person inside the stream right now.
She's. Look, she's there. She's Daddy. Look, she's Daddy. She's Daddy. He's Daddy. She's Daddy.
Alright. So again, finally, for the neck and the head, you could just use the effector here and do what we did with the other ones and set it to an IK chain. I'll show you that really quick just in case. And then put it to a control object and then move it around like that. I personally prefer for the head to use, because it's just a 2-bone head, I prefer to use forward kinematics for the head.
I want. What want you? What do you want?
What do you want? What can I get for you? So, with that being said, I'm going to very, very quickly add a implicit geometry. I think it would be best potentially to use a whatchamacallit, 2 squares for this, just so that they're separate from the cubes. We know what we're looking at. So I'm actually going to match its transforms to the head bone first, so that I know what the orientation of that is. I'm going to adjust its length to be, I don't know, 0.25. See how that looks. It actually goes 0.125. And now I'm going to... So this is where things may get a little bit wonky. So first, I'm going to scale this up so that I can grab it easily. And then this, I'm going to want to constrain the orientation to this. But with this is where we create a loop. I'm going to constrain its position to this. And it's going to give me a warning here because I created a cycle of dependencies. But if I rotate this bone, you'll see that moves along with it now. And its orientation is moving as well. And we can also rotate this, and it moves just fine. It's a cycle of dependencies won't necessarily update properly if you're using something like position and position, because you create a paradox. But on something with a position on one and a rotation on the other, it usually cooperates pretty well. And then same thing, I'm going to create a, actually just going to duplicate this so that I don't have to spend any time doing this. Duplicate this square, and I'm going to remove all constraints. So I can move it downward a little bit. And I'm going to match all transforms to the neck bone here. And I'm going to just kind of increase its plane here so you can see. And you can use any shapes for this. I'm going to constrain the neck bone's orientation to this. And I'm going to come back and constrain this position to the neck bone. And again, we get the same warning. Not to really worry about that. And now I'm going to set my neutral pose of those. So now we have a working... The only thing that's really left to do is actually the hands. If I go through and I grab this controller, I can now move this. If I go through and grab the hand controller, I can move the hand. And we will be creating some more parent-child dependencies in a minute to kind of help with this. I can move this down. So, now the very, very first thing that we're going to want to do, so that we know where our dependencies are, we're actually going to parent a number of our controllers right now. Basically what we are going to do is we are going to select our object, such as the arm, parent it to the hand, and I believe I did that backwards actually. Yes. So what we want to do is we actually want to grab the hand and make it the parent of the arm. And this might seem backwards to anybody that's doing a chain, but the reason for that is when we move the hand, we actually want the arm to move with the hand for when we're using goals. And same thing on the other side. I'm going to parent this to this, and then move it, and it works.
Mommy. Mommy. I want.
And now I'm going to the spine controllers.
What?
Is going to get parented to the pelvis. So that when we move the pelvis bone, or sorry, again, did that backwards. We're going to make the pelvis bone.
I want what? About
Just that. I think that's right. Unless I just did the same thing twice, at which point I apologize. No. Okay, perfect. Now, for the spine there, the top of the rib cage should be parented, or should have the parent of this. Pretty sure I just did that backwards again. Sorry, the entire parent button works different in this than what I am used to for programs. So it's kind of a little bit of backwards thinking for me. Also, I'm hitting a lot of the wrong hotkeys. I've been doing a lot of work in Blender lately, so I'll apologize if that happens as well. There we go. Okay. And now both of these controllers parented to this. Sorry. This controller becomes a parent to this controller and this controller. There we go. Now, again, these can actually be parented to this if you want them to move with it. I prefer to have them separately because I know that my elbow is going to be pointing towards these, and as I move them, I can move them to where my elbow is pointing, and it's not really that big of an issue. So the final thing that we have to do parenting-wise is we parent these. So that our arm moves with us. I'm just making sure that all of my controllers sort of move properly. And so that's basically all that we really need to do at this point for the rig. Now, as for toes, because our foot is already set for there, toes are very, very simple. We're just going to go back. We are going to create an implicit geometry for the toes. First, I don't actually remember if I named some of these correctly, and I did not. So, controller head, controller neck, and now I'm going to go through an implicit geometry of a cube. I'm going to make these cubes 0.05. Maybe a little bit bigger, 0.1. Just to make them a little bit of a size difference away. I'm going to transform, match all transforms to this toe. Transform, match all transforms. I duplicated it to that toe. And I'm going to name this controller left toe. This one I'm just going to name controller right toe. And then I'm going to take this, I'm going to constrain its orientation to here. I'm going to take this and make sure that I set its neutral pose. And then same thing on this side, set neutral pose. Take this, constrain, orientation, click on my little cube, and now I can... The joy with setting your toes to forward kinematics, by the way, and why I like to set neutral pose, is my toe is now on the ground at 0 position translation, flat on the ground at 0 position rotation, which is convenient for us. And you can see it moves properly. And now, finally, we want to set the up vector of our hands as well. So I'm going to go through, and I'm going to what the hell am I trying to do here? I'm going to set a implicit sphere about 0.125. I think 1.05 on the other ones actually. I'm going to transform, match all transforms to the hand bone. And I'm going to move that backwards locally along its Y. I'm going to quickly duplicate that so I can get the other side while I have that selected. Match all transforms. Oh. Match all transforms to this bone. Move it backwards along its local Y-axis. And I'm going to name that controller left hand. Or, sorry, up vector. Left hand. Take the left hand, make sure that it has IK, forced IK on, and constraint, chain up vector to there. And now that should allow us to rotate the hand. If we go And it does. And then set its neutral pose. Same thing on the other side. Constraint, chain up vector. Select this, make sure that it's moving. Perfect. And I'm going to set its neutral pose, name it controller right hand. Now, I believe I actually messed up on the arm a little bit when I went and chained all this together, but you can see, yes, I did. So I'm actually going to take this effector and I'm going to set it as a child, so parent it to this object. And that should allow me to move it. Maybe I did that backwards again. Yes, I did. Because otherwise when I move this down, we want that effect. So we're going to take this, parent to this, and now hopefully that works. Yes. Okay. And then this, I'm going to, pretty sure I'm doing that wrong again. Parent this to this. And now as I move that, it should move. Perfect. So now with the IK rig, if I move this arm around, you can kind of see how that works. And then adjust this hand. If I have a reach goal, I can actually place this hand on a weapon or something. I can take the up vector of the hand and rotate the hand. I can take the up vector of behind the shoulders and move that as well. So get a little bit of an idea of how that all works. Now the final thing that we are going to do for organization purposes is we're going to convert this by hitting S back to the scene view, and we're actually going to place all of this under dummy root, or under ground dummy, but not under dummy root. And to do that, I'm first going to actually create a group. So the first thing, the group is going to be so that if we go into scene view, we can select our controllers. So our name for the controllers will be controllers. And now everything but the spine curve, which we will not necessarily need inside of this group. There we go. And now this controller can go under ground dummy. And I'm going to go ahead and create a null, and I'm going to name the null do not touch. And this is where we're actually going to store all of our controllers. Because we have it all parented properly now, we don't want anybody to actually touch the objects themselves and ruin the parenting structure, so do not touch goes under ground dummy. And that is actually it. We now have our working rig. You can move this around. You can move your legs around. And as a slight recommendation, and this is to prevent any problems, I would actually recommend taking your effectors off of visible and selectable, and taking your bones off of selectable as well, so that you can still go through, same thing with roots, not visible, not selectable. You can still go through and see your bones, you can still see your mesh, but you can't select them because you don't want to be moving them at this point. When you finish creating your animation, you're going to go into your bones layer by pressing L in Explorer, and if you select all your bones and you select members, you can easily key everything down here by hitting the K key. And that's how you're going to export it, because you need your bones to be fixed kinematic, or forward kinematic. But aside from that, that's it. Well, that's it. That's all that you need to animate. You have your